A German pilot climbs into an American P-51 Mustang, the same type of aircraft that helped destroy his Air Force. He's not being forced. He volunteered. The story was so sensitive it stayed classified for more than 30 years. What follows challenges what we think we know about loyalty, betrayal, and professional respect in wartime. Before we dive into this classified story, hit subscribe and like the video. You won't want to miss what comes next. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the Pentagon buried this account and why it finally matters today. This is the tale of Hans Vera and how a death sentence became an unlikely partnership that helped shape the future of aviation. To appreciate how unprecedented this is, we need to go back to December 1944. The Third Reich is collapsing. Hitler's desperate gamble in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, has failed spectacularly. German cities burn under Allied bombardment, and the Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe's skies, has become a shadow of itself. Among the dwindling ranks, however, remain pilots of extraordinary skill. Veterans who had flown since the invasion of Poland in 1939, and survived when most of their comrades did not. Hans Vera was one of them. Born in 1914, he joined the Luftwaffe in the early 1930s, and by 1944 had become Germany's top test pilot, flying their most secret aircraft including the Me-262 jet fighter. On a cold December morning in 1944, his war was about to take the most unexpected turn. On December 14, 1944, Vera was on a test mission in a Messerschmitt Bf-109, the backbone of the Luftwaffe since the Spanish Civil War. This wasn't a combat sortie, but a performance and modification test, the work that kept Germany's shrinking Air Force operational. Then disaster struck. The exact details remain partially classified, but the engine failed. It may have been sabotage by forced laborers in the factories or simply the result of poor quality materials. By late 1944, Germany was scraping the bottom of its supplies and using inferior metals in critical engine components. Whatever the cause, Vera found himself gliding toward enemy territory with a dead engine. His next decision was even stranger. Vera could have tried to glide back to German lines, attempted a belly landing in friendly territory, or bailed out over German-held areas. Instead, he chose to land behind American lines. His later explanation was that he feared causing civilian casualties if he attempted an emergency landing in a German town, and he believed the Americans would at least adhere to the Geneva Conventions. When American forces reached the crash site, they found something extraordinary, a nearly intact German test aircraft and, alive in the cockpit, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced test pilots. Standard protocol called for interrogation by intelligence officers, and then shipment to POW camps in the American interior. Questioning usually lasted only a few days. But when intelligence officers realized who they'd captured, everything changed. This wasn't just another downed pilot. This was Germany's most experienced test pilot, and a man who knew secrets that might hasten the end of the war. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Watson, himself a seasoned test pilot who had been evaluating captured German aircraft since 1943, conducted the initial interviews. Watson had been trying to understand how German aviation technology compared to American designs, and now he was speaking with perhaps the only man alive who had actually test-flown many of the German planes Watson had been studying. What was supposed to be a 72-hour interrogation stretched to 21 days. Watson later called those sessions some of the most fascinating conversations of his military career. Vera could explain not only how German aircraft performed, but why they were designed that way, the doctrine, the engineering trade-offs, and the problems German designers had tried to solve. Watson then had an idea that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Instead of only interrogating Vera about German planes, what if they let him evaluate American aircraft? The immediate response from higher-ups was predictable. Absolutely not. The security implications were enormous. American aircraft designs were classified, and letting an enemy pilot fly them violated every protocol. Watson persisted. The debate went all the way to the Pentagon, and 23 days later a decision from Washington changed everything. What followed violated virtually every American security rule, but the intelligence payoff was judged worth the risk. In February 1945, a classified memo authorizing the most secret phase of Operation Lusty landed on Watson's desk. The conditions were extraordinary. Vera would remain technically a prisoner of war, but be housed in comfortable quarters at Wright Field, rather than a standard POW camp. He would be allowed access only to aircraft the Germans had already encountered in combat. No experimental or prototype designs. Every flight would be monitored by armed guards and aircraft modified to prevent escape. Crucially, Vera had to agree voluntarily. No coercion, no threats, and no promises of better treatment. If he refused, he would be treated like any other prisoner. When Watson presented the offer, Vera fell silent for nearly 10 minutes. He later described that pause as one of the hardest moments of his life. He was being asked to assist the war effort of his nation's enemies. Even though Germany was clearly losing, the war wasn't over. Yet Vera was also a consummate professional aviator. The offer was intoxicating. The chance to fly aircraft he'd only seen in combat, and to evaluate designs from the inside rather than trying to shoot them down. Finally, he spoke and laid down conditions of his own. They were simple but revealing. He would not fly any mission that could directly harm German forces. His evaluations would be honest and professional, and when the war ended, he wanted help immigrating to the United States. After heated Pentagon debates, the impossible decision came through. On March 15, 1945, at Wright Field, Ohio, Hans Vera walked across the tarmac toward a North American P-51D Mustang, the aircraft that more than any other had broken the back of the Luftwaffe. The irony was not lost on anyone watching. The Mustang had been designed to escort American bombers deep into German airspace, and P-51s had shot down many of Vera's comrades. For him, though, approaching the Mustang felt like approaching a masterpiece. Everything about the aircraft impressed him, beginning with the ground crews preparing it. German aircraft maintenance in 1945 was often slapdash, hampered by parts shortages and undertrained personnel. Here he saw American crews who were meticulous and professional, working with clean, well-maintained equipment that was clearly built to last. His first flight lasted 2 hours. When he climbed out, the American test pilots clustered around, eager for his assessment. Vera's response was characteristically direct. "Your engineers have solved problems we didn't even know we had. But what the Pentagon kept secret for 33 years will shock you. Vera's engine failure wasn't an accident. Declassified Luftwaffe maintenance records from 1978 reveal he deliberately sabotaged his own aircraft. This wasn't a capture. It was a calculated defection, and the Americans knew it from day one." Over the following weeks, Vera would test fly virtually every frontline American fighter, the P-47 Thunderbolt, the P-38 Lightning, even early versions of the P-80 Shooting Star jet. Each flight was monitored, each evaluation recorded and classified. What Vera revealed next stunned American test pilots. When evaluating the P-47 Thunderbolt, he immediately identified why German pilots had struggled against it. "German fighters are built for short-range interception," he explained. "We assumed American pilots would fight the same way, but you've built aircraft for endurance, for long missions deep in enemy territory. Your pilots can stay and fight when our pilots must return to base." A month of test flights left Watson and his team rethinking everything. "You don't just build better aircraft," Vera told Watson. "You build aircraft better. The attention to detail, the consistency of production. This is why you're winning the war." American test pilots began to see their own planes' strengths in ways they never had before. What Vera discovered about American aviation capabilities would, had German high command known, have been terrifying. It wasn't just superior engineering. It was evidence that Germany had been increasingly outmatched. At the same time, the Americans learned things that exposed German weaknesses they had not appreciated from afar. But the deeper story wasn't only technical. It was what Vera discovered about himself while flying for the enemy, and what followed would haunt him for the rest of his life. Perhaps the most remarkable detail revealed in the files decades later was the relationships that grew between former enemies who found themselves working together. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Watson later wrote about his surprise. "I had been prepared to deal with a Nazi fanatic. Instead, I found myself working with a consummate professional who approached every flight with the same dedication I tried to bring to my own work." The American pilots at Wright Field initially viewed Vera with suspicion, understandable. Since months earlier, he'd been part of the force trying to kill them. But as they worked together, professional respect developed. For his part, Vera's image of his former enemies changed. Nazi propaganda had painted Americans as soft, undisciplined, and technically inferior. "I had been told that Americans were technically inferior," Vera wrote in his post-war memoirs. But the aircraft I flew, the instruments I used, the engineering I saw, all of it was superior to what I had known in Germany. It was a humbling experience. Watson became more than a colleague. He became something like a friend. They spent hours discussing aircraft performance, the philosophy of flight testing, the future of aviation, and their hopes for a post-war world. That psychological shift settled into the new reality on May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered. The war was over, but Vera's most dangerous mission had only just begun. With Europe occupied and Germany's aviation industry dismantled, his status at Wright Field became complicated, no longer a typical POW, yet not free. At the same time, rising tensions with the Soviet Union made Vera increasingly valuable. He had flown against Soviet aircraft, new Eastern European aviation developments, and had proved trustworthy and professional. So the Americans made him an offer that would have seemed impossible months earlier: a permanent position as a civilian test pilot with the U.S. Air Force. The decision sparked controversy. Some argued a former enemy should not hold such a post. Watson and others pushed back hard. "This man has skills we need," Watson wrote to his superiors. "More than that, he has proven his integrity and his value. We would be fools to send him away." Finally, in December 1945, exactly 1 year after his capture, Hans Vera was offered a contract as a civilian test pilot with the U.S. Air Force. He accepted. Vera worked for the Air Force until 1950, when he returned to Germany to help rebuild that country's aviation industry. His 5 years flying for his wartime captors had long-lasting effects on both sides, shaping post-war aviation in ways few at the time could have predicted. The intelligence he provided about German aviation technology helped American designers understand principles that influenced aircraft development for decades. His insights into combat tactics were incorporated into training programs that prepared American pilots for the challenges they would face in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. But here's the bombshell the Pentagon buried for 3 decades. Information so sensitive it was classified above top secret. Vera's case wasn't just about one German pilot. It became the blueprint for a larger effort that fed into Operation Paperclip and involved more than 200 German aviation experts. Vera was just the test case. The program that brought him to Wright Field was part of that broader operation. While Paperclip is often remembered for controversial figures like rocket scientist Wernher von Braun, aviation specialists like Vera were arguably just as valuable. Vera himself became something of a legend in aviation circles. After returning to Germany, he continued working as a test pilot and aviation consultant well into the 1970s, flying virtually every major aircraft developed in the post-war era from both sides of the Iron Curtain. Watson, who remained friends with Vera until the German pilot's death in 1997, put it plainly: Hans showed that professional competence and personal integrity can transcend national boundaries. Even in the middle of the most destructive war in human history, former enemies could work together toward common goals. That raises the obvious question: was Vera a traitor or a professional doing what he believed was right? The answer isn't simple, but the declassified files shift how we should judge his choice. Consider what both sides gained. The Americans received invaluable technical intelligence and a clearer view of their own aircraft's capabilities through the eyes of someone who had tried to defeat them. Vera gained a chance to survive, to build a new career in the post-war world, and to keep doing what he loved: testing aircraft and advancing the science of flight, rather than rotting in a POW camp. Perhaps the most important lesson is that even in deeply polarized conflicts, there are individuals on both sides who can recognize shared interests and find common ground. The files on Hans Vera's service with the U.S. Air Force weren't fully declassified until 1978. For exactly 33 years, one of World War II's most extraordinary POW stories sat buried in military archives. The secrecy was due partly to the technical intelligence involved and partly because the story complicated simple narratives about good and evil, loyalty and betrayal. Today, Hans Vera is remembered in aviation museums on both sides of the Atlantic. In Germany, he's honored as one of the great test pilots of the 20th century. In the United States, he's remembered as a contributor to American aviation development during the crucial early years of the Cold War. In a world often divided by seemingly insurmountable differences, His story offers a reminder that professional respect and human decency can sometimes triumph over forces that seek to divide us. If you were in Vera's position, captured, your country losing, offered a chance to use your skills for former enemies, what would you do? For veterans and history buffs, have you ever found professional respect with someone who'd been your enemy? Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment, and the best discussions often become future video topics. If this story fascinated you, don't miss next week's episode about the German U-boat captain who saved American prisoners, a story that stayed classified even longer. Until then, remember that history is full of surprises, and the most important lessons often come from stories we thought we knew, but didn't know completely.